Second I started, the dog barks. We real life. I want to talk, though, today about something that happened to me that is very serious and is a crime. I'm doing this more for myself than anybody else to work through what I'm feeling as I continue forward with what I'm learning and what I want to do. So I'm going to get started on the part that everybody is usually shocked at. I was criminally infected by a practicing doctor with an incurable STD. He had an STD, he won't get tested, he doesn't want a paper trail, and he lied to me about his symptoms before we had sex, and I wound up infected. And then after being infected, he admitted what he did, and it was the beginning of an emotionally abusive relationship that ended and escalated once he began to make threats of physical violence towards me. And then eventually in June 2017, I said out loud to a friend that he knowingly infected me in the beginning. It was about 2-3 weeks into the relationship. He knowingly infected me, and once I said it out loud to somebody, I was done. A week later, I broke up with him over the phone. I read a 5-sentence breakup letter, gave the phone to my mother, and then she discussed where to exchange things. We're going to go back and kind of explain the entirety of that story, how it happened, what occurred, and what's happening now. Now he's giving thousands of dollars to badge broadcasters on Periscope. That was not something that was done with me, but I understand why it's happening. I think it's predatory behavior, and he is an alcoholic. It just seems like the disease is progressing. He's definitely narcissistic. I think I just fucked his ego. Not really sure. I kind of wanted to discuss where I'm at right now, what happened to me, and my thoughts. I was on Periscope in 2015. One of my broadcasts was actually shown in my exhibition for my graduate thesis work from Periscope, because you can auto-save the footage. So Periscope was kind of an important element to me when I was in graduate school and when I was examining media consumption habits, because it began to bring an audience base into these private recordings in real time. So I wound up getting a following of about 3,000 people. In December 2015, a month after I had graduated, I did not have a job at that point, and I had property in Savannah I needed to sell. I was in a friend's broadcast, and this account we're going to call Douche on Fleek came in, and he's like, I'm going to broadcast next. He was hilarious. I thought he was hysterical. And then we found out we were 40 miles apart from each other, and somebody was like, oh, you guys should do a group scope. So I'm like, okay, I hadn't met anybody off of Periscope yet. I go to meet him. I made sure I did a background check on him like I always do anytime I ever take a date. And he was the best first date I ever had. Now looking back at it, he was totally narcissistic in how he was mirroring me. I thought he was me. I felt like I had known him for years. He seemed very charismatic. I was hooked after that. And I just thought that he just came in out of nowhere and was a great person. And that wasn't the case. So he told me before we ever had sex that he had been with a woman who had bumps she wasn't sure about. This was 6 to 7 years before we met. In 2009, that's when they were together. And she had bumps she wasn't sure about, and he made her get tested, and the results came back that she had herpes. That was the conversation. And I was like, okay, all right. So she had herpes, all right. Before we had sex, I told him about a test I had 3 months before I met him, and I had not been with anybody between the 3-month point of that test and him, just to let everybody know. I had a regular run-of-the-mill blood test. Everything was clean, except it said that I had low levels of exposure. The levels were below 1 to herpes simplex 2. I had never seen an outbreak whatsoever. I had absolutely no idea where that result came from. And they assured me it could have just been a false positive or just exposure. If your levels are above 1.5, you likely have had an outbreak. But the regular run-of-the-mill blood test has a lot of inaccuracies. So because I was told my levels were below 1, I should be okay, but I still wanted to warn my partner. And he's like, I've been exposed too. But he himself had never been tested. He had somebody before, though, who had. So he's warning me of this. And I'm like, okay. About 2 weeks in, we run out of condoms. We were by the fireplace in his parents' vacation home, which he lives in. And we ran out of condoms. I'm like, let's just do it without one. He was like, are you sure? And I'm like, yes, okay, that's fine. And 2 days later, he winds up with a bump beneath the head of his penis. And I'm like, it's okay. We don't know which one we got it from. And he was starting to act strange then. He had told me he was going to break up with me. And I was like, why would you break up with me? I couldn't quite understand where that was coming from. But I'm like, no, I wouldn't leave you for... It's fine. 6 days later, I wind up with a full-blown outbreak after the first time I had unprotected sex with him. And it was 20 to 30 sores everywhere. I was horrified, but I also was okay with it because, again, we had only been exposed. We didn't know which end we got it from, right? So then we're in the car driving down to Savannah, Georgia to help me move my things. We're in his car because he wanted to help. He came in like knight in shining armor, wanted to sweep me off my feet. And I'm saying to him, you know, the thing I love about you is that you're such a sincere person. And he says, I have to tell you something. Mind you, I am still at this time dealing with 20 to 30 weeping sores all over my inner labia, all over my perineum, all over my rectum, everywhere. We real life here, you guys are going to hear the whole fucking thing. And he tells me in his car on I-95, about 200, 300 miles away from home, he had some bumps he wasn't sure about before we did anything. And he asked his broski doctor friend, dipshit on fleek number 2, what to tell me because I was really pretty and he didn't want to lose me. And his broski doctor friend said, tell her you've only been exposed. And initially I'm like, that fucking son of a bitch, why the fuck would he say that? And as I'm talking to him, he's like, well, I just want to be a sincere person you say you love. That's why I'm telling you now. And it started to digest, and I felt like somebody ripped my intestines out, because at this point he had already told me he loved me. He totally fucking love-bombed me. Told me he loved me. I was like, I love you too. I just completely fell for it like an asshole. And I was horrified. I was horrified that a practicing doctor who took an oath to do no harm had some bumps. No, there weren't bumps that he wasn't sure about. He had scripts before I met him written under the table by doctors, but he won't get tested because he doesn't want a paper trail of it. This guy had reoccurring outbreaks before I met him and didn't want to admit it or disclose it to me because he didn't want to lose me. In that moment, I felt so violated in that car and so horrified, I buried it. After that point, he had me hook, line, and sinker. And it took me 1.5 years to get out of that relationship. It was the beginning of an emotionally abusive relationship that escalated to threats of physical violence being made towards me. The first threat, just to give you guys an example, he was an alcoholic and he smelled of alcohol a lot. My father was an alcoholic who passed away when I was 18. He was also a practicing doctor. So I've been through this before and I understand how this fucking works. And I asked him not to hold me one night. I wasn't mean about it or anything because he smelled like alcohol and it was just upsetting to me. And his response, he got angry and started throwing this little tantrum, and it escalated to, I feel like I should hit you to live up to my expectation. That was the first threat of physical violence, not the last. That relationship was absolutely me just being controlled and brainwashed and belittled. I was told what to think, what to wear, what to eat, how to act, everything. And I just went with it because I lost who I was in it. I was a shell of who I was. Because I didn't want to leave and I didn't want to face the fact that I had herpes. I have no ownership of what I have. And then one day, June 2017, I was on the phone with him after I had gotten back from a viewing, and I asked him, what are you doing? Are you cutting vegetables? We'd been on the phone an hour. It's just a regular question. And he lost it on me. And I just had this visceral reaction where I realized, I'm getting yelled at for asking, what are you doing? Are you cutting vegetables? And I said to a friend, dipshit on fleek just went off on me for asking, what are you doing? Are you cutting vegetables? And my friend was like, why is he going off on you when he knows you just got home from a funeral? And I was like, I need to say something out loud to somebody and I need to know it's been received. So I told Kelton, my friend, the story of what happened to me. And by the end of it, I was wailing, crying to myself. I sent it via text. And Kelton said, Thai, it's okay. You're going to be okay. You're not ruined. And then he said the most important part of it all. But do you really want to stay with somebody who knowingly did that to you? And my response was, I know the answer. I'm not ready to say it out loud, but telling you is one more step towards getting to the conclusion this needs to come to. It took me a week to break up with him after that point. I did not go back to his house. And it took me a week to get the nerve to eventually tell my mother. My one friend had suggested that I have my mother with me when I told him it was over. Or I do it over the phone because I was beginning to not feel safe. He was extremely manipulative. He wouldn't let me leave arguments when we were having them in person. He always said we had to argue until we resolved things, which usually just ended with me just being compliant to shut him up because he would go for hours. Just that narcissistic arguing where there's no end point to it. And my friend basically, because I was having trouble getting the nerve to tell my mother, went behind my back and messaged my mother, more as an ultimatum that I would get the nerve to do it, which I did. I told my mother, I read a 5-sentence breakup letter to him. She's obviously a witness to that, and frankly, I don't think he deserved any more considering what he did to me in the beginning. I had accepted, once I told a few friends, that there is no way he didn't know what he had before I met him. From the way he spoke about it, it was understood after that point that he knew what he had before. Even though he was easing me into it with bumps he wasn't sure about, there's no way he didn't know. He practices medicine. He's an internal medicine doctor. He advises patients on this. He understands the residual nerve pain that he had. There's no way that he wasn't sure about those bumps, which I saw throughout the course of our relationship, which were weeping blisters. The skin would break and it would weep. There is no way he didn't know. So I accepted it, and I knew I needed to end it. I read a 5-sentence breakup letter to him. I then gave the phone to my mother. This is all in a Word document, by the way. And I left the state for 3 weeks. And basically didn't come back until my things were exchanged. They got exchanged like 3 or 4 days after I came back. I didn't know when they were going to be exchanged. They were exchanged by my mother. He never had an understanding of why I left him, and I didn't think he deserved any further of an explanation. Since then, I've had to deal with a lot of rejection. I always said from the beginning I don't want to sue for money. Everybody said I'd sue for his money. I don't want his fucking money. His money doesn't solve this problem. I want ramifications to his life because he should not be practicing medicine. He took an oath to do no harm. He is a direct violation of his board of ethics. After several rejections and starting to really realize the depth of what he has done to me, he branded me. He branded me with his bullshit, and he didn't even ask my consent. And I didn't have the balls to leave because it hurt too much to even face. I compartmentalized it in that car. And I didn't face it until a year and a half later, when I was safe and not in his presence to face it. And February 2018, I finally was going through my Twitter. I was changing my password or something on Twitter. I had never unfriended him from anything. I just didn't want to see his stuff. And when I first left him, I was so scared of him. I just didn't want to do anything because I felt like he had such control over me and I couldn't get away. And I just couldn't, it's like I got away from him. I didn't even want to look at it. And he's posting all these girls, like videos on his Twitter. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to face it and then I'm going to block him and that's going to be it. I haven't looked at his stuff. And I realized he's paying these badge broadcasters on Periscope thousands a month. And there's one he's taking and he's flying her all over the world to Egypt. He's giving her $4,000 a month. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. He's going to go after more and more vulnerable women. The woman he's now going after has openly admitted to having a history of suicidal tendencies in her younger years. She's been with the same guy since she was 19, and he's 10 years older than her. She's married. I don't think he's given any credence to the fact that she's married. And she also has a history of cutting. She's the perfect candidate for this type of abuse. She's vulnerable, and she's weak. And it just hit me. And I realized, you know what? He's going to keep doing this to women. And you do this to the wrong girl, they're going to kill themselves. This is not a punchline. I started to talk to friends, and after that I was like, fuck him for taking me off of Periscope. When we started dating, he wanted me off of Periscope, and he was very manipulative, and I already had herpes, and I was compliant. I just got off. But then he became more degenerate, funding other broadcasters, giving them money. You could see it was going in this direction. But now he's just giving these women thousands. I realize now he targets vulnerable women. I can't do anything about what he's doing now, but I can do something about what he did to me, because I'm not lying. To the day I die, you will hear the same fucking story from me. This really did happen. He really did criminally infect me with an incurable STD and not disclose what he had. And the thing is, I think people just associate it to the STD. It's the insincerity in what was done. When someone takes an oath to do no harm and then criminally infects you with an incurable STD, you don't know what else they're capable of. This is a degenerate, the worst kind. After that point in February, I got back on Periscope, and it was a loud middle finger to him. I had also seen broadcasts that he had done publicly of him drunk off of his ass. And everybody's worshiping him because they know how much money he gives. So, I want the women who are still taking money from him. I want social media, women on social media. I want broadcasters on social media to know what happened here. I have blood work proving what I'm saying. After I broke up with him, I got another run-of-the-mill blood test, and I learned that my levels were now herpes simplex 2, 1.65, herpes simplex 1, 13.2. Before I met him, I had 0 on herpes simplex 1. I spoke about it on a herpes support group, and somebody in medical chimed in and said, I don't think you have herpes simplex 2. That sounds like a false positive based on the levels and the first test. They advised me to get the Western blot. I got the Western blot. I now know, without any uncertainty, I only have herpes simplex 1. I was negative for herpes simplex 2. That means I had nothing before I met him, or had sex with him. So, and I got back on Periscope, got myself a following. I slowly have begun to talk about it. Dipshit on Fleek has mostly disappeared, however, he's still giving these badge broadcasters money. To the women who are still taking money from him, I don't know what lies have been told about me, but I really can only advise you to use caution with this person, because he's not who you think he is. He's a predator. And I have blood work proving exactly what I'm saying. I have video documentation a month before I ended it with him, after he berated me for an hour over a $9.99 a month Netflix bill and fiscal responsibility. I have a video recording where I listed out everything wrong, and by the end of that video, I finally got the bravery to say he knowingly gave me herpes and didn't disclose. And there is no denying my sincerity in that video. That video is time-stamped. If I was lying, why the hell would I have made that video? Why would I be coming forward now? Because I'm a victim. Because it's taken me this long. Since being on Periscope, a lot of people reached out. I slowly began to reveal my story. One of my friends who contacted my mother when I was trying to break up with him, she anonymously called some people in law enforcement, and we got confirmation that this is a crime in the state of Maryland where I was infected. At this point, I cannot discuss legally what is going on, but regardless of what's going on legally, I need to do what's right for me. I do not want anyone experiencing what I've been put through. I could have lived with having been infected with herpes by somebody who told me. But somebody lying the way he lied to me, it's fucking vile. I'm only saddened that these people still choose to associate with this person, because this is not someone you want to be in the presence of. I don't care what he's doing. It's all a facade. It's all for possession. But to the day I die, this is what happened. And it took me a year and a half to get the nerve to even say it. Now that I've said it, you will not get me to back down. I want women in social media to please be aware that there is a practicing doctor who is funding broadcasters. He has herpes simplex 1 beneath the head of his penis. He is not properly monitoring it, the last I know, other than taking Valtrex that he has written under the table when he's having an outbreak. If you have unprotected sex in any capacity, you stand between 5 to 10% chance of getting infected with what he has, because he won't take a daily suppressant. Any woman that may have been battered, abused, if I had one piece of advice for you, you need to talk to people about what's going on. You need to speak about it. You need to make a recording, do something. You need to talk to somebody. Abusers will tell you you shouldn't be talking to other people about this. They try to isolate you. That's exactly what happened with me. I wasn't talking to anybody about this. I didn't share this with anybody. And finally, when I did, the severity of what he did finally hit me. And now, the more I'm learning, the more I'm realizing how bad what he did actually is. Regardless of what I think of the women who are taking money from him, it doesn't make it right to do this to people. And nobody deserves what happened to me.
I'm hoping that, though, if I say everything... Oh, he gave me herpes in the beginning. He told me that he was exposed to it the same way I was. I had a blood test a while ago, and I found out I was exposed to it. I've never had an outbreak, and I told him that before we ever did anything, and he told me he had the same issue, and, or he told me he'd never had an outbreak, but the girl he was with had. And then we had unprotected sex, because I really trusted him, and I've never done that in my past relationships. And I got fucking herpes, and so did he. And then he admitted to me later that he had had outbreaks. I have never told anybody that, except for this recording.